With a spate of affordable super telephotos being released onto the market in the last couple of years, wildlife photography is now more accessible than ever before. Places like Bradgate Park in Leicestershire and Richmond in London with their managed deer herds are fantastic places to cut your teeth with wildlife photography. But once you've nailed those basic settings that help you to freeze a moving subject in motion, how do you take your images onto the next level? Well, today I'm going to give you a few tips to help you to get professional looking results. So first, let's recap those basic settings. Now, when I'm shooting wildlife, I'm normally shooting in aperture priority, and I usually use quite a wide aperture to give me a shallow depth of field in my images. On this fantastic Sigma 150 to 600, the widest aperture I can use is a variable f5 to 6.3, and it's usually around that 6.3 mark I'll be using, maybe just a little bit narrower if I've got bright enough conditions. However, just because I'm shooting in aperture priority doesn't mean to say that I'm not paying any attention at all to shutter speed. With a long focal length like this, any camera shake is going to be really accentuated in your image and can be really quite damaging. To combat that, there's a really good rule that you can bear in mind, and that's that your shutter speed when using a full frame camera should roughly match the focal length that you're using. So when I'm at 600mm, I'm aiming for around 1/600th of a second. If I find that the shutter speeds I'm getting are a little bit slower than that, I'll just bump my ISO to increase the shutter speed that I'm getting. I'm also using a single focus point so that when I find focus, I can find focus on my subject's eyes, the part that I want to be sharpest in the image. And I'm also using continuous focus to keep them in focus as they may be moving through a scene. Now, if you're not used to visiting a deer park with your camera in hand, it's really easy to get carried away when you see that first deer and just take hundreds and hundreds of shots, but not to really think about what it is that you're capturing. The trouble with that is that a lot of the images are not really going to be that inspiring. They're going to be the deer there with his head half up, half down, chewing on a bit of grass, you know, nothing too exciting at all. But if you can wait just a bit until you see moments unfold, be it the deer looking straight down the barrel of the lens and getting some really great eye contact in your image, or a bit of interaction between the deer themselves, maybe a little bit of a rut or something happening, that's always going to result in much more dramatic and striking images. So my first bit of advice is to wait for moments. Now, while you're waiting for that moment to happen, don't forget to consider composition. It's just as important in wildlife photography as in any other genre. Now, by that I mean things like the rule of thirds and all those classic compositional rules, but also things like viewing space. And the idea of viewing space is that you leave more negative room in the direction that an animal is looking or moving than behind it. And that creates a really nice natural balance in an image. If you place your subject so that it's too close to the edge of the frame, it's going to feel restricted and it's going to look like you haven't really considered where your subject's about to move. So for the most impressive images, don't forget to consider viewing space. Now, the deer herds in places like Bradgate and Richmond are managed, they're not completely wild, but that doesn't mean to say that we don't want to give that impression in our shots. We want these images to look like you might have just been strolling through the woodland and stumbled across these creatures. Now, one of the things that can really ruin this impression is things in the background of your image, be it walls, fence posts, cars, or even visitors to the park walking past. They're all going to ruin the effect of your image. So, where possible, consider moving around your subject to make sure that you get a nice clean background, be it just some grass or even some trees. Anything like that is going to add to the authenticity of your image. Now, the final thing to consider is shooting angle, and this is one of those things that can have a massive impact on how successful your shot is. By taking all your images from a standing height from your eye level, you're going to create a lot of quite flat looking shots. But there are two better angles from which to take your image. The first is from the deer's eye level, and this is a great angle for creating a real sense of connection between the viewer of your shots and the animal itself. The second is to get down even lower and use that shallow depth of field that we've created with a wide aperture to really increase the impression of depth in your image. And you can do this by placing bits of foliage between you and the subject, and it can be really good for creating a bit of a frame around the subject that really draws attention to it. So there's my quickfire guide to more effective wildlife imagery. Even if you can't incorporate every one of those tips into every photo that you take, remembering to use a few when you can will lead to much better images.